focus on your PAC teaching event for about the second week of your lessons on To Kill a Mockingbird, and we're going to focus specifically on what you thought went particularly well during those 5 days, and what you want to remember as you continue through the final about 2 weeks, I guess. You still have to go on the.
Okay. So, I think the very first day of my pact went particularly well. It was a little bit nerve-wracking because I didn't know if the students were going to get what I wanted them to get. And that was understanding that Scout and Gem were parting company, meaning that they were growing apart from each other. And so the term I was worried about was the term parting company. And so we did a mind map, which guide them towards an understanding of what it meant to part company with someone. And I think from there, everything kind of just panned out because we specifically looked at a passage and that showed Gem and Scout arguing with each other or disagreeing with one another.
And you might remind those people who are viewing this video won't remember what that parting company is about in that fairly early scene.
During that scene, it's chapter 6, I believe. Gem and Scout are disagreeing about whether or not Gem should go over to the Radley's house to retrieve his pair of pants because it had gotten caught on the fence. And so he tells Scout that he's going to go. And Scout tells him that he can't because, something bad could happen to him. He might get shot and he might die. And so she's worried about his safety, and he's worried about getting in trouble with Atticus. That is what he is most concerned about. And so you can see that Scout being so young and Gem being much older than her at this point, they aren't seeing eye to eye and they don't see the same things. And so getting the students to see that the two of them are actually far in age, further in age as they grow older, it was the key. And at first it was a struggle.
For the students to understand.
Yeah, to students to understand. But I think after giving them time, splitting the class up and having some of the students write about what Scout was thinking, and then having the other half write about what Gem was thinking, and then sharing out their ideas, and then putting those ideas together. I think once we talked about that, and the students started seeing the two different perspectives, they were able to get it. And I remember specifically a student saying, "Oh, that's why they're parting company." And in that moment, I was like, okay. In that moment, I was like, yes, they are getting it. So that was a successful day.
So they initially didn't understand the term parting company, or didn't understand specifically why Gem and Scout might have gone their separate ways in this question of whether Gem should run the risk of retrieving his pants in the dead of night while Radley's brother has the shotgun.
So the worry I had was whether or not they would understand the term parent company. And although there was slight confusion, it was not as bad as I thought it would be. On the other hand, it was getting them to see how Scout and Gem were parting company that became the difficult task. But splitting them up and having them look at the different perspectives really helped.
And having them voice those, and the fact that parting company can be taken literally, going different ways, and can be taken metaphorically, I remember being an important part of that lesson. Just review for me why it was important for you to introduce that the degree to which they were parting company at that fairly early stage. How did you envision that as being important as they moved forward in their reading of the novel?
So I saw that as being important because Scout, there are many things that Scout has trouble understanding, whereas Gem, from chapter 6 onwards, you see Gem growing, and you see that he's starting to understand things that his sister does not understand. And so that incident was really important because the students would be able to track and see that they're not only parting company in terms of their relationship with each other, but their mindset as well. And so Jem is growing up into a gentleman, and Scout is still childlike, and she's still exploring her coming of age. You know? So, and that was that pivotal moment when things were changing. So you can see the differences between the two.
Right, right. So that sort of explains why it was important to zero in at that moment. Yeah, because the way it ended. Now, how about the strategy that you used? You said that you were particularly pleased with how that first day went. What was it that you did that you felt was particularly successful with your ninth graders?
Getting the students to write in different perspectives. Because if I had told them, okay, write in Scout's perspective, now write in Jem's perspective, you know, for each student, I think they would have had more difficulty because they had an extra task that they have to do. And by letting them focus on just one character and then sharing that idea with another student, doing that would enable them to see, like, oh, this is what Scout was thinking. This has nothing to do with what Jem was thinking. So getting them to see that. So I think that was like that key point that changed their understanding of what was happening at that moment.
Right.
So.
And how about the subsequent days? That was day one of the teaching event. So
I think that after that day, I continuously asked them about you know, like, okay, what's happening here that is showing the two of them parting company? And we also moved into working on identity charts, which doesn't have much to do with parting company, but we that was being introduced. And although it wasn't what I expected, I did get it was a good thing because I was able to see how my students were thinking. What was their idea of what makes up somebody's identity, right? That influences someone's identity.
Right.
So, and it took longer than I expected, but I did get a chance to see how they were seeing their understanding of the story and their understanding of the characters, like the complexity of the characters and what influences them to make the choices that they do make.
Right.
And because they drew identity charts, I was actually, you know, visually see in that moment, okay, this is the quote that you chose for your identity chart for this factor, and so now I know what I can do to help you better understand these characters. So, in a way, it was successful. So.
Right. And just to bring that identity chart focus a little forward, how is the identity chart, or how do you envision the identity chart accommodating itself to the fact that, as you just pointed out, Jem is growing in certain ways, growing apart from Scout, and Scout is, of course, growing in certain ways too, in the way she's the primary avenue from which we are being educated as readers of the novel, because to a certain extent her own perception does change, and to a certain extent her own identity changes as well.
I'm hoping that as we continue to work on the identity charts, we're going to continue this week, I am hoping that the students will begin seeing, like, oh, Scout has changed here, so we need to add something else to our identity chart. And so that's why we keep going back to it.
Right.
And by the time we finish this unit, they should have gone back to the identity chart a couple of times.
Right. So the identity charts aren't so much a way to help students understand the fixed identity of different characters and why they might act the way they are because of that fixed identity, with the way you might do with Bob Ewell.
Right.
They also can be used to explore what you know about the character at that point and what perhaps the character hasn't revealed for you. What about little incidents? For instance, Atticus, I know, is one of the focal point for identity. What about incidents like his shooting of the wild dog?
The mad dog?
The wild dog, right. The rabid dog, yeah. Where you see something that you would never have thought was part of his core identity or character until it's revealed in that incident.
So the students haven't gotten the chance to add that to Atticus's identity chart yet.
Right.
But I think that is also important for them to understand, because it shows a lot. It tells them a lot about Atticus's moral, and we've talked about morality in the class as well. I didn't do that during my PACs, but it was something that was introduced later on, and I think that because morality is a large theme in the novel, it would be important for students to understand Atticus's morals, because he's the one that influences. He ultimately is the one who influences Jem and Scout in understanding right from wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking the other profound influence of that shooting the rabid dog is, of course, Jem comes to a completely new understanding of his dad.
And he skips off at the end of the chapter saying, I'm a gentleman, just like
right,
so.
yes. As a sort of a wrap-up question, Emily, if you looked back, particularly on the PACT teaching event, and then a little bit more forward to your subsequent lessons on To Kill a Mockingbird, what would you describe as what's most important about the teaching of this novel for your ninth graders? And I'd like to have you ask it in the following way. If you were to literally meet the exact same class of ninth graders 1 year later, next spring, as sophomores, what would you most want them to remember about their experience of reading and responding to this novel?
As in, what would they remember about the novel, or what would they remember
about the experience? The whole experience. Not necessarily. It doesn't have to do. It doesn't have to have anything to do with facts and characters, and you might say the data of the novel. No, I was trying to get at the experience, what you want them to bring forward a year later as their most striking memory, their most vivid memory of this experience with you.
The most vivid memory. I think for me it would be for them to have an understanding of their own morals. What do they believe is right, right? And how do they make that decision, and what can influence those decisions that they do make? Our essential question is how do the factors? Wait, I'm sorry. How does our identity influence the choices that we make?
Right.
And I want the students to be able to walk out of the classroom saying to themselves, like, this is the person that I am, and because I understand myself and this is my identity, these are going to be the things that influence the choices I make. And because they are growing, just like Jem and just like Scout, they know that they're going to continue to grow, and their identity isn't fixed, and they can change their identity if they so wished, So letting them know that they have that leeway to reconstruct their identities as they're growing up, and they don't have to make a choice just because of some part of their identity that says that they have to make this choice. They could change that part of the identity so that they can make a different choice. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense, and it draws the analogy between your students as readers of the novel, and particularly Scout, and to some extent Jem, as well as characters that are changing.